666.
Well, we talk about Vision 2030, as you know, uh, and it infuses pretty much everything as we assess Saudi Arabia. And we know from firsthand experience, we know from our guests, and I think in particular people like Mark Thompson, King Faisal Center for Research in Islamic Studies, who studies the socioeconomic trends in Saudi Arabia. We know from talking with young entrepreneurs like Renato Jeffrey or Sarah Bin Laden or anybody, and they talk about the paradigm shifting impact of Vision 2030 as it pertains to them and how it has changed, how they look at things, what they think is possible, how they approach almost everything they do in their lives. And so we know there's a ground truth to it that things are really different in Saudi Arabia. It's always interesting to find when people put some analysis to it and try and get some data points. And so the reason is this: is I have referenced in the past, and we've talked about it, Lucian, this group called Carma, CARMA. It's a global media intelligence provider. About a year and a half ago or so, they analyzed the impact of Vision 2030 on media perceptions of Saudi Arabia. So they've come out with an updated one, which is great. And I read an article about it in Campaign Middle East. Campaign Middle East covers consultancies and a lot of things like that, PR firms. And I've already communicated with Rawan Hashem, who's head of insights from MENA at Carma, and I'm hoping she'll come on the show. But in the interim, I wanted to share with some things that they had found, because it underpins sort of what we talk about. And I'm not going to say it's anecdotal, because our understanding is more than anecdotal. It's firsthand experience, and it's on the ground research. So I guess, but this is data analysis, and the way they do it, Carma, is they conducted a comprehensive research analysis of media coverage across 33 major markets and over 2,400 major international titles in traditional digital and broadcast media. And the focus of the research was to understand the impact of Vision 2030, specifically on Saudi's reputation. Also to examine how the country was perceived in regional, international, top-tier media. So it's a milieu in which we live, because we're sort of curating from media and that sort of thing. So it's interesting what they found. The research, and this is some of the things they pull out, it showcased a 4% increase in positivity and a 12% decrease in negativity between the first and last quarter of 2022. Vision, and this is a term of art, I guess, in the business. Vision 2030 share of voice grew by 13% by the end of 2022. I guess share of voice is a measure of the market that your brand owns compared to your competitors. I'm not sure who the competitor is in this situation, but Vision 2030's share of voice is growing. One of the things this Carma report sort of points out is social topics witnessed a surge of 10% in coverage. Economic news declined by 12%. And again, this is between the first and last quarter of 2022, last year. According to Carma, this evolving media focus indicated a growing recognition of the societal impact of Vision 2030, something we talk about all the time, as the kingdom's efforts to drive social development resonated with both regional and international audiences. So that's interesting that, basically they're saying that the impetus, the social impetus for Vision 2030 is being more widely understood and at least internalized by regional and international audiences. So Carma's research revealed key positive drivers. There are 6 of them, and I'll follow it up with key negative drivers. So the 6 that they pointed out is a booming economy, which we're familiar with. Last year, Saudi Arabia was the fastest growing G20 economy. Thriving tourism and entertainment industries, which we cover and we're well aware. And I want to point out, this wasn't even a conversation 5 years ago. Building stronger global ties. And this would be things like Saudi Arabia's active role in peace negotiations with Yemen, growing cooperations with several nations such as China and South Korea. These were all heavily discussed in the media. Dominating the global oil market. Obviously, that's well known. Transforming the sports landscape. Again, not part of the discussion 5 years ago, and something we cover in depth here at the 966. Number 6, promoting rich cultural heritage. Again, this is something we talk about, and I think it's really fascinating because a big component of Vision 2030 is taking the existing cultural heritage and putting it forward. And this is, arts events, festivals, any number of things. So those are the positive 6. Negative drivers that in Carma's research gain traction and warranted attention. 1, accusation of sports washing, the flip side of that, higher profile in sports. 2, deepening rift in U.S.-Saudi relations, something we covered deeply here and extensively. 3, the flip side of dominance in oil is backlash over oil cuts. 4, scrutiny of ambitious sustainability goals. This is interesting. This is skepticism raised by top-tier outlets regarding Saudi Arabia's ability to fulfill its green commitments. Particularly interesting with respect to the NEOM project. So that's something you need to put in your mental register if you're Saudi Arabia, is there's doubts about their sustainability claims. And this is 5. This is really interesting because this is not something I would have picked. Debate sparks by Jeddah demolitions. So, we've talked about Jeddah Central, and it's, there's a revitalization going on in a lot of Saudi cities. And in that case, in Saudi Arabia, I think it was 5 or 7 neighborhoods that they've cleared out because they're trying to revitalize and redesign the city in that area. So that comes across as a negative in Carma's research. And 6, experts weighing in on the feasibility of Saudi mega projects. And the kingdom's ability to deliver on its mega projects came under scrutiny by experts and journalists. NEOM, in particular, raised skepticism regarding feasibility and funding challenges. So in closing, the article ends, the kingdom's ability to overcome political challenges, the prominence of social themes amidst geopolitical unrest, the far-reaching influence of Vision 2030, and the emergence of sports and tourism as key discussion topics all underscored Saudi Arabia's position as a crucial regional and international player. All right. So there it is. I mean, I liked it because, as I said, it's based on some analysis and some comprehensive research. I hope we can get Rowan on to talk about it more in depth. But really interesting. And in some ways, it corroborates what we're seeing. In other ways, there was a couple of surprises. So all in all, a worthwhile read.
Richard, this type of stuff, these types of reports are enormously valuable, like you noted, in just piecing together a broader understanding of Saudi Arabia. Obviously, these are just media trends and what is being portrayed in the media. It isn't a full survey of every human living being who answered direct questions, but it shows how perceptions have changed. And I think this is great. And one thing that I really want to note that jumped out to me when you started discussing this and when you shared this last night and we sort of like looked at it was the negatives. I mean, if you jump right to the study highlighting some negative drivers that gain traction and warranted attention, that's important wording because it says negative drivers that gain traction. So these are negative issues that are starting to become more and more common. But if you look at that list, like that list is, if they did this 5 or 6 years ago, and they didn't, but if they did, think about what would be on that list and what isn't on it today. Not 9/11, not Jamal Khashoggi's murder, not education or what they teach in schools, not financing Islamic buildings abroad that could become hotbeds of radicalization, not financing terrorism through charities, not women's rights in Saudi Arabia. I feel like those are the things you sort of hear casually. I mean, that's totally anecdotally because it's just my circle or like people that I talk to randomly. But those were the issues 2, 3, 4 years ago, and then also 10, 12, 14 years ago. To have this list have none of those on it is incredible. Oil cuts, U.S.-Saudi rift in relations, sports washing, ability to fill green commitments. Just, we're talking about a new set of challenges, and there are always going to be that set of challenges. In 5 years or 10 years, no matter how successful Vision 2030 is or how successful the reforms are, you're going to have another list of criticisms for Saudi Arabia. There the way things are going right now, they'll probably be different than this list. But that's amazing to me.
I think it's a great point. I think that's an excellent point, and it's a sort of we talk since we've been curating news for how long? Long
14
time.
years at
Yeah.
least.
And even before we were together, I was doing it before that. You mentally tick off in your mind terms, and then you start registering how frequently it happens, and then you start registering how it becomes sort of just an accepted phrase, and blah blah blah. And you see over the arc of a time period how perceptions change, language changes. And your point is a really good one, because everybody has something to complain about Saudi Arabia, the U.S., or any country. And it's interesting how the conversation has different touchstones, different language, different keywords, and I would consider it, which is what you're suggesting, and I think very clearly, and you're accurate. I couldn't agree 100% that this is significant progress.
Yeah, Richard, and I really like the way that they sort of put this in the last sentence that you read. Resilience, innovation, and a commitment to positive change. I mean, that's what we have seen, especially you and me, in the last 5 or 6 years, and in the last 2+ years ish that we've been doing this podcast. There is just a steady, focused commitment on Vision 2030 and doing what Saudi Arabia wants to do for itself that would be in its best interest. And they are hearing all the criticism for sure, but they also know that they can't really do anything about people not updating their perceptions of the kingdom. They just have to stay on the path of what their vision is. And they have been doing that. And it's weird because it's 2023 now. And man, there's a lot of progress. We talked last week about NEOM and all the progress happening there in just the previous week from that podcast. And then in the last year, it's stretched out times 10 or 12. It's unbelievable. And so, and Richard, this makes me think too about the piece that we discussed last week that was your one big thing that got a lot of feedback and a lot of attention, which was drawing attention to the David Rundell piece and Gefeller talking about, let's get down to the facts on 9/11 here. Let's talk about some of these talking points in the U.S. that are way too common, that are inaccurate. And so I don't know, just this is a really cool, and yeah, Richard, I hope that we have someone from Carma on here to discuss this, because this is great.
I would expand on your on one other thing, and I don't want to go too long. I have no doubt that the Saudi government has data mining for this, and they are deep into understanding what social media, what's being said on social media, and all sorts of platforms. I mean, it's a responsible thing to do. One of the big differences between now and 6-7 years ago is Saudi Arabia is significantly less concerned about criticism than it used to be. It could get tied up and tripped over about any kind of aspersion, or it would just spend a lot of energy and time, and perhaps diplomatic and brand equity, addressing something that they perceive as an injustice or inaccurate or unnecessary, whatever, sort of in the forum of public discourse that is normal. They don't do that as much anymore, and I think it's healthy, and I think it's good. And I say this, and specifically with sports washing, because there's I forget what the term I use, but a firestorm, or of criticism about sports washing. I don't think they particularly care, because they have other plans. And I've said it before, but I do think they handle criticism a little better than they used to.
Yeah.
And I think that's in part because they feel very confident about the direction in which they're headed, and that they've had some successes that stacked up and this sort of thing. So, that's just an aside, but it sort of is it is consistent with the conversation about international perceptions of Saudi Arabia and media perceptions. So anyway, that's, my last thought on it, I guess.
That was good. Richard, that is a really good one. And we're going to, as we always do, include a link to this piece. And inshallah, we will have somebody from Carma joining us in the near future to discuss it. But that'll be in the comments of the show notes as well.